Who wins in the current situation? Since February 12, there has been a continuous decline in U.S. stock markets. The situation took a sharp turn when Russia rejected the offer of Saudi Arabia to further reduce oil production. As a result, the OPEC Plus transaction was disrupted. And now, from April 1, oil-producing countries can actually produce oil without restrictions after this fall has turned into a collapse. The cause of all these shocks is the accumulated imbalance in the global economic system, which was exacerbated by the epidemic of the coronavirus COVID-19. Over the past month and a half, global mass media in front of our eyes easily and elegantly almost out of the blue created a psychopathic perception of the coming apocalypse. Emerging in China, a new strain of coronavirus in a month and a half has become an important factor in the political, financial and economic life of the whole world. Although almost everywhere statistics show an insignificant percentage of morbidity and mortality compared to even ordinary flu. Nevertheless, there is a widespread halt in production. The authorities recommend that the population does not appear on the streets of the cities, do not take trips and communicate as little as possible with the outside world. The massive immobilization measures that only communist China is capable of today are widely broadcast throughout the world and convince that the situation is extremely serious and threatening. Otherwise, why spend so much effort and money? They are trying to repeat similar measures in the countries of Southeast Asia and Japan, and South Korea has firmly taken the second place after China in the prevalence of this mysterious virus. The panic that arose in China in mid-January after the detection of a lethal coronavirus gradually spread to almost all continents, primarily Asia and Europe. In the United States, the situation was presented in such a way that all this is happening not just somewhere far abroad on some other Chinese planet, but the United States itself is not miraculously touched. Although the promotion of the COVID-19 propaganda campaign would not have been possible without the direct participation of the American media, and most likely the participation of certain groups of the American establishment in the current coronavirus crisis is not limited to this outreach. Nevertheless, the facts remain whether the supervirus is the cause or not. There is a real drop in production and a decrease in consumption, a decrease in population mobility and other systems similar to those predicted in connection with the virus-free decay of the unipolar world and the global market in the market of large regions of the multipolar world. Therefore, as they say, if COVID-19 weren't there, it just had to be invented. The current coronavirus epidemic is in fact aimed at solving the same civilizational tasks that would otherwise be solved by a world crisis, by a world war or some kind of natural cataclysm, not the fact that it will become a gravestone for liberal globalism, but in any case it marks a place already selected for burial quietly. At the same time, there is less and less doubt about the human endeavor of the new virus. A study of the COVID-19 genome indicates that it is the result of targeted genetic engineering, rather than naturally occurring point mutations. As you know, back in 1981, a book by science fiction writer Dean Koontz, entitled The Eyes of Darkness, was published in New York, describing events related to a very uncertain but not too distant future related to the extremely dangerous Wuhan 400 virus by the name of the city nearby with whom is the secret laboratory where the virus was created. In the American movie 1975 3 Days of the Condor tells about events, the main one of which was unfolding in a certain New York company. Its employees are busy reading the press and detective stories from which they select work stories and transmit them to the CIA for possible use. By the way, the director of 3 Days of Condor was directed by Sidney Pollack, later the producer of Hollywood's most conspiratorial film Eyes Wide Shut, of the last film directed by Stanley Kubrick. This begs the simple and obvious question, to whom was it profitable and who loses from this in the first place? So far, there are several almost equally probable and therefore equal hypotheses that explain the essence of the events, but in general they can be reduced to two general schemes. Scheme number one is that in the end, the main victims are China, and the main beneficiary is the global financial lobby with its American branch in the person of the deep state. This scheme is supported in the first place by the fact that the large-scale reaction of the PRC authorities with a wide mobilization world has not only seriously hit the industry and the financial and economic system of the PRC, not only a 0.5 to 2% growth rate of the Chinese economy in 2020, but and caused around the world, especially in the countries adjacent to the Red Dragon, a wave of massive anti-Chinese hysteria up to the attack on the Chinese in Japan and South Korea. The closure of borders for citizens of the PRC here was noted by Russia, strengthening anti-Chinese sentiments around the world, while the anti-epidemic measures undertaken by the Chinese leadership themselves, including the closure of multi-million cities and restrictions on the rights of Chinese citizens, did not cause any indignation as a harsh vital necessity. In addition, the global difficulties of the economic and financial order that arose due to COVID-19 factor cast doubt on Donald Trump's excellent chances of being re-elected U.S. President in November of this year. A coincidence or not, but this factor began to play out immediately after the failure of the impeachment process of the U.S. President, when the initiators of this process were forced to transfer the case from the House of Representatives to the Senate on January 16, 2020, where the Republican majority would not have committed suicide under any circumstances supporting congressional accusations Democrats at Trump. When a bear rally on U.S. stock exchanges began in mid-February, the question of whether the drop in quotes would lead to a full-blown crisis or whether it could be restrained became a stumbling block for the current U.S. administration. In fact, while maintaining and intensifying the economic downturn, Trump's chances, whose economic success served as the basis for his popularity in American society for the second presidential term, became doubtful. Meanwhile, for political elites of the deep state of the United States primarily associated with the Democratic Party and the Progressive Republican Party, such a development of events after the failure of impeachment seems to be the only way to prevent Trump from re-election and further politics in the style of Make America Great Again, depriving deep state representatives of huge state feeders, access to which 45, the U.S. President restricted for them in the first lines of his reign. These are very powerful forces that have a huge interest in such a development of events in the year of the presidential election. It's worth adding that back in 1985, one of the leading U.S. universities, Duke University, proposed to Wuhan University of China to carry out a joint long-term program of virological research, and this was allegedly done with money donated George Soros and Bill Gates. Both of these multimillionaires are known as proponents of limiting Earth's population growth and opponents of Trump. Scheme number 2 is much more complex and is based primarily on the fact that the Chinese leadership's behavior in this situation looks simply illogical and suicidal both economically and politically. If during the 2003 SARS epidemic Beijing officially took the usual anti-epidemic measures without involving military and without wide publicity in the media, now his behavior was just the opposite and more like practicing actions in a truly emergency situation, and even with publicity for the whole. Perhaps this was a demonstration of strength in the holding of a red line for Hong Kong, where pro-Western fermentation continues about the British and American opposition, or even for those who want to repeat the Hong Kong experience in the cities of South China. Perhaps the over-alarmist and over-public approach of the PRC authorities to the surge in coronavirus infection was dictated by some confidential information about its features and real threats to the country's population. But somehow, the sacrificial and suicidal behavior of official Beijing is no less likely to be the result of an agreement in the framework of the armistice in the U.S. trade war. For at least the past 20 years, various experts have turned their attention to the continuously growing astronomical debt of the United States, which is covered by dollar emissions from the Federal Reserve System of investments of foreign investors and a number of other manipulations that allow maintaining the supernatural stability of the American economies for such a long time. All forecasts regarding the collapse of the dollar empire despite the crises of the 97th, 98th, 2000 and the first and 2008 and 9th years invariably remained empty and postponed to later dates. The total U.S. government debt is now approaching the level of $23 and $4 trillion, including an external debt of $6 and $1 trillion, and, taking into account corporate debt and long households, to $75 and $9 trillion. At the same time, the total assets of the United States are estimated at $146 trillion, and foreign exchange and credit derivatives are $670 trillion. Nevertheless, this empire has been and continues to be, but nothing ever lasts in the world. Even our universe, once arising, once may disappear, collapse, or evaporate. The systemic contradictions that have accumulated in modern civilization must somehow be resolved and removed. Moreover, China's accelerating growth rate 3 times higher than the US rate in the current global economy led to an increase in the threat of civilizational collapse, a threat that inevitably had to be realized in a certain area of global development, and perhaps this area of humanity was already so close that the only opportunity, though, to partially pass by it was the reformatting of the world from global unity into a new multipolarity. The transformation of the conditions of which the United States dictated China is just the mouth of Trump. Once again, we are already seeing the closure or reduction of a whole range of global industries such as tourism and related industries. The curtailment of the aviation and automobile industries and, as a result, a drop in the level of prices for raw materials, primarily for energy resources, a decrease in state budgetary appropriations and other items. The prospects for a general global recession are estimated at an average of 25–30%, for some countries exceeding 50% and reaching even 65–70%, and for others, correspondingly below average or even leading to significant economic growth. As a result of the collapse of an inoperative global market, macro-regional associations based on the principle of geographical proximity should arise. Among them, the macro-region of the USA, Canada, Mexico will gain a preferable position in comparison with Southeast Asia, where competition between the PRC and Japan will flare up, of course with some participation of Russia. Thus, instead of the extinction of American hegemony, the conditions are created for its restoration on a new basis, including both technological innovations and reliance on almost the entire North American continent, so the current coronavirus crisis can be seen as a kind of dress rehearsal with a simulation of the present crisis. One scheme does not exclude the other at all, and which one will ultimately prevail will show only the further developments.